respect is the key. Being part of a community and being a part of a neighborhood where people look out for each other, I think is critical.
One of the things we hear a lot about is how to make it a good experience for you, and part of that is partnering with your neighbors. So it's kind of like living in the residence hall. If you have a good relationship with your neighbors, if they see something happening or if they hear that you're in distress, they will reach out and try to help you. The same thing works for living in a community. If you're a good neighbor and you reach out to the folks next door and you kind of help them take care of stuff, or you check in on them from time to time, maybe you watch, you take their mail for them when they're on vacation, there's those kind of partnerships you might do. They'll help you. If they see someone breaking into your house, or if they see someone loitering or something wrong, or if they notice that you haven't been around a lot, they'll do those kind of follow-up things to check in on you. And they also contact us. We have had, on rare occasion, but on occasion we've had neighbors call us and give compliments about good student interactions they've had, great neighbor relations, that sort of thing. The goal is to have and build those good partnerships that are healthy. If you are living next door to an elderly person, it's making sure that they're looking at you as a younger person and kind of help them out and reach out to them at times when maybe they could use your help. A lot of times that's usually in the winter season when shoveling and that kind of stuff can be difficult. So it's just kind of having common sense and being a good neighbor the same way we would expect you in a residence hall to be a good neighbor to your peers. We want you to have that same collaborative relationship in the neighborhood. Does that make sense?
These are some things that we've already discussed, so I'm not going to go into them because Nicole, I think, did a very good job of covering these things. But I think at the end of the day, when you put all of this together, it once again promotes being a good neighbor, all right, and following some of the typical guidelines that we would expect in any city across this country. But when you're transient, meaning you're living temporarily in a location, sometimes it's easy to just blow off or ignore some of the expectations. We're going to discourage that. We're going to encourage you to make sure that you're being part of the solution, not part of the problem. And again, I guarantee you, the more neighbors see you respecting the community, the greater there are chances to have socials and functions where they're not calling 911 and they want students living in the neighborhood because they realize if it's not us, it can be other individuals that don't have the best interests of the neighborhood moving in. So they want to have students who are about their business, taking care of their academics, taking care of their yards, being mindful, being respectful. They expect college kids to have some fun. But remember, if we're not doing and taking care of some of these other things to keep the neighborhood right, you have angry neighbors just waiting for the moment when your music is up to call the cops. So let's make sure we are mindful of that give and take exchange, and I think you'll be in good shape. Some of the responsibilities that are pretty straightforward also have been touched upon. They're all, in the age of technology, you can go online to the Chester website and find some of the information that Nicole mentioned if you ever need it. There's a Chester City Bulletin that often comes out and goes to the mailboxes of all of us that live in the Sun Hill community, so you should get information. I know a lot of times people get what they think is junk mail and just throw it away, but look through the mail sometimes when it comes from the city because it's trying to provide you information that will be helpful to you gaining an understanding of what the city's expectations are in relationship to living in the community. Respecting thy neighbors is just simple, straightforward things. Again, be careful with where you park because it can lead to ticketing if it's illegal.
The other issue with parking is that these homes, many of them, and some of us live off campus as well, many of these houses were built 80 plus years ago and people didn't have a car or they had one car for an entire family. And many of you live in houses with probably 4 of you. How many live in a place that has more than 4 of you in the house? Okay, so almost half. So how many? Is there 5 or 6? 5. Okay, so you have 4 or 5 people. Do you all have vehicles? Some yes, some no. So you have to imagine in many of the houses there's at least 2, if not 3 or 4 vehicles. Can those streets accommodate all those vehicles? Not well. We know that is the case. So one of the issues that comes along with that is you as a Widener student, you can get a parking tag, you can park your car in a lot on campus, and then you can kind of designate, maybe you can alternate with your roommates, come up with some ways to make it work so that your neighbors can also have a place to park, because those folks have purchased those homes, you're renting it, you all have a right to park on the street. However, they don't have rights to park in our parking lots, but you have a right as a student to park in the parking lots. So you can utilize those different things and still be able to live in the space and have a good living environment and not have issues with your neighbor in terms of you always taking up 6 spaces and they can't even find one.
We know that the undergraduate student handbook, which is located online, is something that anybody who hears me talk knows how important I think it is for you to familiarize yourself with the code of conduct, which is right in the heart of that handbook. But if you're juniors or seniors, which most of you should be, you've already kind of learned the lay of the land, how to navigate the system. That's great. But just remember, once you move off campus, sometimes it's good to revisit the code to make sure you're good and that you have a firm understanding. Particularly when it comes to if there's violations of the law that happen, which there's a greater chance of that happening when you live off campus. Know that you are exposed to what we call double jeopardy. If something happens off campus and it's a violation of the law, you're automatically in violation of the Student Code of Conduct. And in those cases, you'll be addressed not only by Judge Davis from Chester City, but also myself. I talk to Judge Davis once a week. We compare notes, and then we do follow-ups in relationship to that. So the goal is not to get in trouble at all, obviously. But know and understand it's not, if it happens off campus, it's not Widener's business. Oh, it very much becomes our business, and we address those things in a timely fashion. So be mindful of the handbook. When you have off-campus status, it should be senior status normally, but we know there are some people who are exceptions to the rule. But if you're not officially registered with the Office of Residence Life, and then trouble happens, that's where students get jammed up. So who am I talking about? If you got the email from me, you're not those individuals, because you got the information to come to this meeting. There are a bunch of other individuals who go to our school who live in Sun Hill, who I think they're living home with mom and dad, locally. Ridley, Aston, Media, Alden, neighboring areas. They're really living over here near you guys. Those individuals, if they are caught in violation of the policy where they should be registered with us, that's a problem. All right, so if you know people out there, I'm not saying rat on anybody, but encourage them to be compliant so that they can get access to the same good information that you have, and then there's less of a chance of them ending up in our office. So that's the good neighbor plug that I want to put out there in relationship to that. Any questions up until this point related to that? Okay, well, we're looking good on time, so I want to roll through here. You want to touch on that?
We want to make sure that you submit a signed copy of your lease, and it's critical that it's signed by you and your landlord. Does anybody know what happens if the landlord gives you a lease and you sign it with your roommates but they don't sign it? It's not valid. It's not a valid lease. So what happens is that landlord, for some reason, at a whim, could go ahead, sign up some other students to live there. You thought you signed, you show up to check in, or you show up after break, and all of a sudden there's people living in your house. You need to make sure that they sign and you sign, and every person who lives in your house should be on the lease. That can be problematic. I have had students in the past who did not have everyone in the house sign the lease. Then the person who didn't sign felt less likely to get in trouble if they did something, and then they broke a toilet, they damaged pipes, they did all kinds of things in the house that created issues for the students who lived there. And then when the landlord came to take care of it, they're billing the residents who are on the lease, and that other person has no lease, so they're not liable for what happens there, but you as a student are. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of that particular piece. Make sure that if it's not signed, you need to take care of that. And if you have not yet sent us a copy of your lease, we usually give you a little bit of leeway right now, because we know early in the summer they don't always give you the leases right away, but we expect that those within the first week of school that we will be receiving those leases in the Residence Life office. So please come to the Student Affairs Suite in the University Center. Instead of going right to the dining hall, go left and straight back. That's where my office is, and you can come in and bring Ms. Garrity a signed copy of your lease so we have that information for you.
You only need one copy of the lease from each house, right?
Yes, it should have all the names on it though. If there's anybody missing, that's problematic for us. And it should have the names legibly. I've had people give us things and you can't read anything. It could be like Mickey Mouse on there, so we need to make sure it's actually valid signatures. The other issue is renter's insurance. How many of you have renter's insurance? Can you raise your hand? Good. Okay, so I have about half the room. The reason why you need renter's insurance is because if anything happens in your house, your landlord is not going to replace your iPad, your laptop, your shoes, your clothes, your jewelry, whatever you have in your house. They are not responsible for that. So if anything happens, if there's a facility problem, God forbid your house goes on fire, if there's a theft, if there's a pipe that breaks over holiday break, any of those things could happen in your house, and if you're not insured, the landlord is only responsible for the physical structure of the house. The same way in the residence halls, we're only responsible for the physical things we provide you early on. We don't replace all those other pieces. The landlord will not replace all of your belongings. A couple years ago, I had students who were engineering majors, had their senior project. You guys know how big that is. Senior projects are huge. Over the winter break, something happened in their house with old wiring. The house went on fire. They were away in Florida on spring break. They came back. Their house was pretty much gone inside, and their senior projects were in there. They had no renter's insurance. They had no way of replacing all of their stuff. So that was very sad and unfortunate, but that's one of those cases where we use that as a case study to say, please get renter's insurance. You can get it a couple different ways. You can take it on your own, or you can contact your parents' homeowner's insurance. If your parents own a home, sometimes they have an umbrella policy that will allow to cover you. If not, you can go online. Sometimes your car company, if you have insurance with your car, they will also help you get a better package if you put the deal together, so you can do your car and your house at the same time. And then you should individually get that, so each of you can pay into that every year to cover your home and all the items inside. It's very important to have renter's insurance.
Looking at the protection components, we've already talked renter's insurance. Smoke detectors, you want to make sure within the home that you have appropriate working fire system. All right, a lot of times the battery is the most important piece. If it's not a hardwired smoke detector, you want to make sure you know the type of smoke detector that's in your house. Most are battery operated. If that battery is not in there, the smoke detector is not working. So you want to make sure you're good to go in relationship to working smoke detectors. In row home style, I also recommend having carbon monoxide detectors. If you don't, just because that's a silent, no smell kind of thing that can be very much a killer. So we want to make sure that you're thinking about all the different types of safety devices, that when you think about being in your parents' home, you want to have those same type of things in the place where you're living during your school year here. So please consider those types of things and checking to make sure you have working equipment in your house where you are renting. Looking at your house, particularly row home style, you want to know where all the doors, exits, windows, depending on what floor your bedroom is on, all of those things. You want to make sure there's more than one way out for you. So be thinking about those things before an emergency happens. We know that at times there have been parties that happen in the basement of houses where there may be only one way out. But if something happens near that exit where it's the one way out, you're in a jam. So we want students to be thinking that way. Think about your safety in all the different capacities, whether it's your house or a house you're visiting. That's very important to know about emergency escape routes. Some of the things we're putting up here are just for your protection recommendations. When you're making payments in this day and age, we're going to recommend, payments by check. When it comes to your rent or bills or electronic, cash can be tricky, so we want to make sure you're doing the right things, when it comes to making your payments to safeguard yourself. And making sure you have emergency phone numbers in a location that everybody in the house has access to, or keeps those numbers in this day and age in their cell phone so that you have them. When an emergency happens, it's hard to memorize numbers and think of what the fire department number is. Obviously 911 is easy, but there are times there are other numbers you want to have, so we want to be thinking clearly about those types of things. All right? Bells and whistles. Just in a recap and an overview, when it comes to off-campus incidents, remember the standard of expectation that we have. Your off-campus behavior is still our business. You're a Widener student 24/7. We monitor behavior both on campus and off, and whether it be spring break, when you travel, if it's athletics, or just spring break for vacation. If you go to faraway lands, if you violate the law, and Widener finds out about it, you will be held accountable. So be mindful of that. All right? Other campuses, other states, other countries, be mindful of that. We expect you to uphold the standard of expectations that we have here on campus. And when it happens off campus, all I have to have is a report of behavior. Even if there's no citations from the police, if I get information that leads me to believe and have an understanding that one had parties and underage drinking occurred, and I got information, we're going to have some conversations. So be mindful of that. It's not about getting people in trouble. It's about making sure you understand that off-campus behavior can lead to you being in a bad place if you get a criminal record or a student judicial file with my office. When it's time to apply to grad school or get a job, those things can hurt you. And we don't want to see you in a jam. After all of the money you're spending on this education, let's not put ourselves in a bad spot when it's time to get the number one job or the number one school we want to go to and have that put in jeopardy because of some decisions we made related to alcohol or anything else, or how many guests we had at a party. So make good decisions there. We do notify parents when there are arrests, criminal charges, underage alcohol violations, any drug violations. If people go to the hospital for any reason, no matter what age you are, we will reach out to emergency contacts. So know those things. That's how we operate here at Widener. Not every school does that. We do those things here. From a safety standpoint, we think of those things and we want you to understand why we do those things. Don't even need to cover this because I know as upperclassmen you're familiar with our student conduct process. You want to avoid it. The off-campus behavior often can become a highlight that end up in my office, but I firmly understand and know that you're not going to put yourselves intentionally in a position during junior and senior year where you have to interface with the student conduct process. Because the closer you are to graduation, the higher the stakes are and the higher the accountability is. So be mindful of the process, have a firm understanding of it, but most importantly, try to avoid finding yourself within that process. We're great on time for those of you that have the 8 p.m., so we've tried to take care of that. In conclusion, and Catherine, if you want to add anything in here, we've talked about respect, we've talked about safety, your personal safety, the community safety. When it comes to this whole conversation for me, many of you have heard me say this before, it's accountability and responsibility, all right? We want you to have fun, we want you to have a great experience, but we also want you, when it's time to become an alum, to be marketable. So you have to have balance. Too much of anything isn't good for you. I can't say that enough. So keep that in mind. Too many people at the house isn't good for you. Too much alcohol isn't good for you, no matter what age you are. We have this happen a lot for those of you that are about to turn 21. When you're turning 21, that's not the time to drink 21 shots. That's dangerous. We have that happening. 21 shots of Jack Daniels, 21 shots of vodka. Really? That's not where we need to be at. It's got to make sense. And as community members, whether it be teammates, floor mates, suite mates, club organization, friends and colleagues, you don't even want to stand by and watch somebody do that, right? So let's be good community members and help each other out. Be safe and be responsible, right? It's a combined effort. All of these groups work together. All of these groups work together. And ultimately, our job is to keep the neighborhood safe, keep you safe, and let's avoid ending up in the disciplinary process or the criminal courts in relationship to our behavior. All right, so at this point, we're concluding. We're going to answer any questions if you have any before we let you go. So let me open the floor for a few questions.
I'm just curious, can you elaborate on the rumor that Widener is installing like security cameras around Sun Hill?
I can.
And what's going on with that? What's the purpose? Why?
Yes, absolutely. From what we were told by the president's office is that Widener is in the process of negotiating and waiting to hear back in relationship to grant funding, where for at least 2 years now, there have been conversations with this city about having cameras placed in strategic areas of the whole city. Because of Widener's location, as you can imagine, and because of the amount of individuals on our campus that have the access and the ability to write grants, where you are lobbying at the state and federal level for monies for programs such as this. It is a Chester City initiative to look at having possible camera systems throughout their city. We are lobbying to be one of the first ones in relationship to that in the Sun Hill area, and I can tell you why Widener would want to. One, quite honestly, Widener University owns numerous properties in the Sun Hill community. It won't be any of the ones that you would necessarily live at because we don't sublet or rent to undergraduate students. But we do rent to graduate students, faculty, administrators, visiting scholars, a number of individuals who will work and partner at Widener. So absolutely, I can't tell you exactly when during this school year, but if the grant comes through, there will be a process and a time during this year where there will be camera installation in certain areas within the Sun Hill community. That's very much a real possibility. I can't tell you when it will happen because it is related to some funding issues that we're waiting to hear on. So that's not just rumor, that is a reality that may happen.
If you look at the president's memorandum online, it talks a little bit about it's a Safe Cities program that the institution's working with the city on. It's even all the way through up to Crozer Chester area where the hospital is. They're actually partnering with the institution. We're all trying to get the grant together because many cities that have varying levels of concern, if it's a college campus or if there's crime or those kind of things, cities will do this. And they do it to be able to figure out forensic things. So if there's, God forbid, a shooting, or if there's, God forbid, some kind of really inappropriate behavior or problems in the city that is hard otherwise to do, you can't have an officer on every street corner. It's just not workable. So cities are implementing these systems so that if there were a problem, they could zoom in and get forensic data to allow the police to get to the bottom of really difficult cases.
So that is a very real piece. Other questions before we let you go?
You said if we received an email from you that we are considered off campus, if a student hadn't, is there actually an age cutoff if they're older than a certain age that they won't get that email?
No, if they registered as Widener University students, if they registered appropriately with the Office of Residence Life in relationship to their eligibility to live off campus, they would have received that email, because we it's a running spreadsheet with all the emails of all the people who have complied. So any of you in this room, at minimum, we know you've told us where you're living in order for you to get that email. I can tell you, based on the amount of people that are here and the amount of people I anticipate at next week's meeting, there's normally at least 40% more people out there who have not done what all of you have done. So we appreciate the fact that you have followed that protocol. And normally the ones who violate the law and policies and get in the jam are not the people who registered this way. It's the person who's out there that I don't know is there until they get arrested. Then I have to deal with them, and they're flying under the radar until they get caught. I applaud you guys for taking care of business. So that's very helpful.
They usually tell my office if they're living at home with mom and dad in Ridley Park, and then we find out from a police report that you're not really doing that, and then that's why we catch you. So now you're falsifying documentation to the institution, and you did something illegal. So it's like a double jeopardy issue. It's like if you're going to do that and get in trouble and not follow the policy and falsify documentation, you're just ratcheting up the issues that are there. So if you have peers that you know are doing stuff like that, have them come ahead and at least share with our office what their locations are, where they're living, because we really do need to make sure that they're apprised of all the same things that you know, and that we do have registration information on them. If God forbid something happens in the city, we need to notify students of any kind of precautionary things. If they're not on lists of data fields where we go ahead and drop in emails and put in information and share information with you, they're not going to get that information. They're going to be really at a loss for information sharing and any assistance that we might provide.
Any last questions? Any last questions? All right, we thank you for coming out this evening. If you have not signed the sign-in sheet, please sign that. That is my way of verifying that you have attended. Thank you for coming out.